Every man needs something to believe in, something that reminds him good still exists. Sometimes that belief comes from unexpected places, like a frontier town where hope seemed scarce. In the 1800s, there lived a horse so massive and fierce that every rancher who tried riding him was thrown. The townsfolk called him cursed, a beast that could never be tamed. Years later, this legend grew until one quiet young cowboy stepped forward. While others tried to break the animal with whips and force, this boy chose a different path. He approached, with patience, with respect, with something the horse had never experienced. What happened next would change not just that legendary beast, but the heart of an entire town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Copper Ridge, Montana Territory, in the autumn of 1887. The town hadn't changed much in the past decade. Still the same weathered storefronts, the same creaking boardwalks, and the same worn faces of folks trying to make an honest living on the edge of civilization. But there was something different in the air that morning, something that made people walk a little faster past the old stable at the end of Main Street. Samuel Mitchell wiped the sweat from his brow as he finished mucking the last stall in Henderson's livery. At 19, Sam was tall and lean, with calloused hands that spoke of hard work and a quiet manner that made people comfortable around him. His father had taught him that a man's character showed in how he treated animals, and Sam had taken that lesson to heart. "Sam, you best stay clear of that back corral today," called old Pete from the feed room. Pete had been managing the stable for more years than anyone could remember, and his weathered face bore the lines of a man who'd seen every kind of horse that ever lived. "That devil's been pacing all morning. Got that look in his eye again." Sam nodded, but his gaze drifted toward the separate enclosure behind the main stable. Even from here, he could hear the heavy hoofbeats, the occasional snort of an animal that commanded both fear and respect. The horse they kept back there wasn't like the others. He was something else entirely. The locals had taken to calling him Thunder, though no one remembered who'd given him that name first. What everyone did remember was how he'd come to Copper Ridge 3 years ago, brought in by a cattle drive that had picked him up somewhere in the Dakota Territory. The trail boss had warned Mayor Whitman that the horse was trouble, but the town needed good stock, and Thunder was magnificent to behold. Standing near 17 hands high, with a coat black as midnight and eyes that seemed to hold storms. Tushy, first rancher to try riding him, had lasted maybe 10 seconds before being thrown so hard he'd broken 2 ribs. The second had been more careful, more experienced, but Thunder had reared up and struck out with his front hooves, missing the man's head by inches. After that, word spread quickly. This wasn't just a spirited horse that needed breaking. This was something dangerous, something that might be beyond taming. Martha Colson pushed through the stable doors, her practical boots clicking against the wooden floor. At 45, she ran the Silver Dollar Saloon with the efficiency of a general and the heart of a mother hen. Most folks in Copper Ridge came to Martha when they had problems, partly because she poured an honest drink, but mostly because she had a way of seeing through to the heart of things. "Morning, Sam," she said, setting down a basket that smelled like fresh biscuits. "Brought you and Pete some breakfast. Figured you'd be starting early today." "Much obliged, Miss Martha," Sam replied, accepting the still warm biscuit she offered. "What brings you by so early?" Martha glanced toward the back corral, where the sound of hoofbeats had grown more agitated. "Same thing that's got half the town talking. Mayor Whitman's calling another meeting about that horse. Some of the council members are saying it's time to stop fooling around and put the animal down." Pete spat into the dirt. "That'd be a waste and a shame. Horse like that, there's got to be a reason he's so riled up. Ain't met a horse yet that was born mean." "Maybe so," Martha said, "but try telling that to Bill Henderson. He's got a mortgage payment due, and he can't afford to keep feeding an animal that nobody can ride. Been 3 years now, and Thunder's done nothing but eat hay." and scare off customers. Sam had heard this conversation before, in different versions from different people. The economics were simple enough. Thunder cost money to keep, and he generated none in return. In a town where every dollar mattered, that was a problem that couldn't be ignored forever. "What's the mayor proposing?" Sam asked. "Going to advertise one more time, see if any horsebreakers want to try their luck. But if nobody can tame him by the end of the month, well..." Martha didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The three of them stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to Thunder's restless movement in the back corral. Then Martha spoke again, her voice softer than usual. "You know, Sam, your daddy had a way with difficult horses. I remember when he first came to town, folks said he could gentle any animal that walked. Maybe it runs in families. Sam's father had died when Sam was 12, kicked by a spooked mare during a thunderstorm. But before that, John Mitchell had been known throughout the territory as a man who could train horses that others had given up on. He'd never used whips or harsh bits, instead spending hours just talking to the animals, learning their temperaments, earning their trust. Different kind of challenge," Sam said quietly. "Pa never dealt with anything like Thunder." "No," Pete agreed. "But maybe that horse needs a different kind of approach. Every man who's tried to ride him has come at it the same way, with strength and force, trying to break his will. Your daddy would have taken time to understand why the animal was fighting in the first place." Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Mayor Whitman was riding up Main Street with two other men Sam recognized as council members. Even from a distance, their expressions looked grim. "Here we go," Martha muttered. Mayor Whitman was a small man who tried to make up for his size with an oversized mustache and a voice that carried farther than it ought to. He'd been elected 3 times running, mainly because nobody else wanted the job of managing a frontier town's problems. "Morning, folks," the mayor called out as he dismounted. "I trust you've heard about tonight's meeting?" "We've heard," Martha replied. "Question is, what's the real purpose? You already made up your mind about that horse?" Whitman's face reddened slightly. "Now see here, Martha. This is a business decision, plain and simple. We've got a valuable piece of livestock that's been nothing but trouble and expense. The town can't afford to keep it around as some kind of monument to stubborn pride." "What about bringing in a professional?" Sam suggested. "Someone who specializes in difficult horses." "Costs too much," replied Councilman Davies, a thin man who owned the general store. "We already tried that twice. First fellow lasted one look at Thunder and left town the same day. Second one tried for a week and said the horse was unsuitable for domestic use." Those were his exact words. "Besides," added Councilman Porter, "we've got other concerns now. Had another letter from the railroad company yesterday. They're still interested in running a spur line through Copper Ridge, but they need to know the town is stable, growing, not wasting resources on hopeless causes." The railroad. Sam had heard talk about it for months now. If the company decided to build through Copper Ridge, it would mean jobs, growth, prosperity for everyone. If they chose another route, the town would likely continue its slow decline, until it became another abandoned settlement on the frontier. "So what's the timeline?" Martha asked. 1 month, Whitman replied. "We'll post notices in the neighboring counties, see if anyone wants to take on the challenge. But if Thunder isn't rideable by the 1st of November, we'll have him put down. It's the practical thing to do." Sam felt something tighten in his chest as he listened to the conversation. He'd watched Thunder from a distance many times, had seen something in the horse's eyes that others seemed to miss. It wasn't madness or evil, it was pain, deep, old pain that had never been properly addressed. What if someone local wanted to try? Sam heard himself asking. The 3 men turned to look at him, and Pete raised an eyebrow. Martha's expression was unreadable. "Local?" Mayor Whitman repeated. "Sam, I appreciate your interest, but this isn't a job for someone without experience. That horse has injured 3 men already. We're not looking to add to that number. My father trained horses," Sam said quietly. "He taught me his methods before he died." "Your father was a good man," Whitman replied, "but he never dealt with anything like thunder. This animal is beyond normal training methods." "Maybe that's the problem," Sam replied, feeling his courage grow. "Everyone's been trying normal methods on an abnormal situation. Maybe what thunder needs is something different." The mayor exchanged glances with the council members. Different how? Sam realized he didn't have a complete answer to that question, but something inside him knew there had to be another way. "Time," he said finally. "Patience. Understanding what made him the way he is, instead of just trying to force him to be something else." "And how long would this understanding take?" Davies asked skeptically. "I don't know," Sam admitted, "but I'd be willing to try if you'll let me." There was a long pause. Pete was grinning broadly, and Martha had the beginning of a smile on her face. The mayor and council members looked less enthusiastic. "Sam," Whitman said carefully, "I appreciate your willingness, but the town can't afford to—" "I'll do it for free," Sam interrupted. "Room and board is all I need, and I'm already getting that for my work here at the stable. If I can't make progress in a month, well, you're no worse off than you are now." Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Councilman Porter spoke up. "What do you think, Whitman? Kid's got a point. We're not risking anything but time, and we were going to wait a month anyway." The mayor tugged at his mustache, clearly uncomfortable with the idea but unable to find a solid argument against it. "I suppose," he said slowly, "if Pete here is willing to supervise, and if Martha's willing to vouch for Sam's character, we could consider it." "I'll vouch for him," Martha said immediately. "And I'll supervise," Pete added, "though I suspect young Sam here knows more about horses than most folks give him credit for." Mayor Whitman sighed. "Very well, but I want to be clear about the conditions." "1 month, Sam. If thunder isn't rideable by the 1st of November, or if anyone gets hurt in the process, the arrangement ends immediately." "Agreed?" Sam felt his heart racing, but he kept his voice steady. "Agreed." As the mayor and council members rode away, Pete clapped Sam on the shoulder. "Well, boy, you've got yourself quite a challenge. Hope you know what you're doing." Sam looked toward the back corral, where Thunder continued his restless pacing. The horse was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, a creature that seemed to embody all the wildness and danger of the frontier itself. "I hope so too," Sam said quietly. But as he watched the great black horse move with fluid power in the confines of his enclosure, Sam felt something he hadn't expected. Not fear, but recognition. There was something in Thunder's movements, something in the way he held himself apart from the world, that reminded Sam of his own struggle to find his place in a town that sometimes felt too small for the dreams he carried. Maybe, Sam thought, understanding Thunder would mean understanding himself as well. The scream that shattered the peaceful afternoon air 3 days later would stay with Sam Mitchell for the rest of his life. He dropped the bridle he'd been mending and ran toward the back corral, where a crowd was already gathering around a figure writhing in the dust. "Get Doc Henley!" someone shouted as Sam pushed through the circle of onlookers. Jake Morrison lay on his side, clutching his left arm against his chest, his face twisted in agony. The experienced horsebreaker from Billings had arrived that morning with confidence and credentials, boasting to anyone who would listen about the devil horses he'd tamed in his 20 years of work. "What happened?" Sam asked Pete, who was kneeling beside the injured man. "Fool tried to lasso Thunder from inside the corral," Pete replied grimly. "Rope got tangled around his arm when Thunder bolted. Drug him 15 feet before the rope broke." Thunder stood at the far end of the enclosure, his massive chest heaving, his dark eyes wild with something that might have been fear or fury. Foam flecked his mouth and he snorted loudly, pawing the ground as if challenging anyone else to try their luck. Dr. Henley arrived within minutes, his medical bag in hand and his expression grave as he examined Morrison's arm. The verdict was swift and final. The arm was broken in 2 places, and Morrison would be lucky to regain full use of it. "That horse is a killer," Morrison gasped as 2 men helped him to his feet. "Put him down before he murders someone." Word of the incident spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. By evening, nearly half the town had gathered in the Silver Dollar Saloon for an impromptu meeting that felt more like a trial. The sentiment was clear and unanimous. Thunder had crossed a line from dangerous nuisance to genuine threat. Mayor Whitman stood on a chair to address the crowd, his voice carrying over the angry murmurs. "Folks, I know we're all upset about what happened to Jake Morrison today, but we need to think clearly about our next move." "What's to think about?" called out Henry Davies from the back of the room. "That animal could have killed Morrison. Next time we might not be so lucky." "The horse has got to go," agreed Bill Henderson, Thunder's reluctant owner. "I've been patient for 3 years, but I won't have blood on my hands because I was too soft-hearted to do what needed doing." Sam sat quietly in the corner, listening to the chorus of angry voices, feeling his opportunity slipping away before it had truly begun. The silver pocket watch his father had left him seemed to pulse in his vest pocket, keeping time with his racing heartbeat. "Now hold on," Martha's voice cut through the noise. "We all agreed to give Sam here a chance to work with Thunder. Seems unfair to change the rules because one fool got careless." "Martha's right," old Pete spoke up from beside the bar. "Jake Morrison went into that corral like he was roping a steer. Didn't take time to read the horse, didn't respect what he was dealing with. That's his mistake, not Thunder's fault." "Fault?" Henderson's voice rose. "Pete, that horse sent a man to the doctor with broken bones. How is that not his fault?" "Because," Sam said quietly, standing up, "Thunder was protecting himself." The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the young man who had spoken with such certainty about an animal everyone else saw as a monster. "Protecting himself from what?" Mayor Whitman asked. Sam took a breath, feeling the weight of the town's attention. "From being hurt again. Jake Morrison went into that corral with a rope, same as every other man who's tried to break Thunder. And every time, Thunder fights back because he thinks he's fighting for his life." "That's fool talk," Henderson shot back. "Horses don't think like people. They respond to strength and discipline, and when they don't, you put them down." "My father didn't believe that," Sam replied, his voice growing stronger. "He said every animal has reasons for what it does, and if you want to change the behavior, you have to understand the reasons first." "Your father never dealt with a killer horse," someone called out from the crowd. "No," Sam agreed, "but he dealt with horses that other people had given up on, horses that had been beaten and mistreated, until they trusted no one. He taught me that the worst behaviors usually come from the deepest hurt." Martha stepped forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Sam?" Sam felt every eye in the room on him, felt the weight of Thunder's life hanging in the balance. The pocket watch seemed heavier in his vest, as if his father's memory was urging him to speak. "Give me 3 days," he said. 3 days to prove that Thunder can be reached without ropes or whips or force. If I can't make real progress, if I can't show that there's another way, then you can do what you think is best." The room erupted in arguments and protests. Some folks thought Sam was brave. Others thought he was suicidal. Mayor Whitman called for order, banging his gavel on the bar until the noise died down. 3 days isn't very long," Whitman said carefully. "It's long enough to know if my approach has merit," Sam replied, "and it's short enough that the town won't lose much if I'm wrong." Bill Henderson shook his head. "I won't be responsible for another man getting hurt. If you get yourself killed, Sam, that's on your head, not mine." "Agreed," Sam said without hesitation. "And what makes you think you can succeed where experienced professionals have failed?" asked Councilman Porter. Sam was quiet for a moment, searching for words that would make sense to people who saw Thunder only as a problem to be solved. "Because I don't want to break him," he said finally. "I want to understand him." Another wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Martha stepped up beside Sam, her presence lending weight to his words. "I'll support Sam's proposal," she announced. 3 days is fair, and if anyone can reach that horse, it's someone who approaches with respect instead of conquest." "I'll second that," Pete added. "Boy's got his father's way with animals. Worth giving him a chance before we resort to killing." Mayor Whitman looked around the room, gauging the mood of the crowd. The argument could go either way, Sam realized. Fear and frustration were powerful forces, but so were fairness and curiosity about whether a different approach might work. All in favor of giving Sam Mitchell 3 days to work with Thunder? Whitman finally asked. Hands went up around the room, not a majority, but enough to tip the balance. Sam felt relief wash over him, followed immediately by the terrifying weight of what he'd just committed to do. Motion carried, Whitman announced. Sam, you have until Sunday evening to show that Thunder can be safely handled. If you succeed, we'll discuss a longer-term arrangement. If you fail, or if anyone gets hurt in the process, Thunder will be put down Monday morning. Are those terms acceptable? Yes, sir, Sam replied, his mouth suddenly dry. The crowd began to disperse, people heading home with plenty to talk about over their supper tables. Some patted Sam on the back and wished him luck. Others shook their heads and muttered about foolish young men with more courage than sense. As the saloon emptied, Sam found himself alone with Martha and Pete. The three of them sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them like evening shadows. You know what you're doing, son? Pete asked gently. No, sir, Sam admitted, but I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going into that corral with a rope or a whip or the idea that Thunder needs to be conquered. I'm going to try to understand why he's so afraid. Martha reached across the table and patted Sam's hand. Your father would be proud of you, and for trying, regardless of how it turns out. Sam pulled out his father's pocket watch, its silver surface worn smooth by years of handling. The inscription inside read, Time and patience reveal all truths. J.M. I hope you're right, Miss Martha, Sam said quietly, because come tomorrow morning, I'm going to find out just how much truth one scared young man and one angry horse can handle. The evening breeze carried the sound of Thunder's restless movement from the corral behind the stable, a rhythmic reminder that Sam's greatest challenge, and perhaps his greatest opportunity, lay waiting in the darkness ahead. Dawn came slowly, to Copper Ridge, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold. Sam Mitchell had been awake for an hour already, sitting on the front steps of the boarding house where he rented a small room, carving a piece of maple wood with his father's old knife. The rhythm of the work calmed his nerves and helped him focus on what lay ahead. The wooden whistle took shape gradually under his careful hands, each cut deliberate and smooth. His father had taught him to make them when he was 10 years old, explaining that horses responded to consistent, gentle sounds better than harsh voices or cracking whips. Music speaks to something deeper than fear, John Mitchell had told his son. A horse will remember a kind sound long after he's forgotten. A beating. As Sam walked toward the stable, the whistle tucked safely in his shirt pocket, he could hear Thunder moving restlessly in the back corral. The great horse had been pacing since before sunrise, as if he sensed that today would bring another confrontation with the humans who seemed determined to break his spirit. Pete was already waiting by the corral fence, holding 2 cups of coffee, and wearing an expression of cautious optimism. Morning, Sam. Thought you might need this. He handed over one of the cups, the steam rising in the cool morning air. Much obliged, Sam replied, taking a sip of the strong bitter brew. How's he been? Restless. Didn't settle down much last night. Think he knows something's coming. Sam studied Thunder through the fence rails. The horse stood at the far end of the enclosure, his magnificent head held high, his dark eyes fixed on the 2 men with unmistakable wariness. Even from a distance, Sam could see the intelligence in that gaze, and the pain. What's your plan, son? Pete asked quietly. Start simple, Sam replied. Just be present without threatening. See if I can get him used to my voice, my movements, my intentions. Pete nodded approvingly. Your daddy would start the same way. Spent 3 days once just sitting outside a stall with a spooked mare, reading aloud from the newspaper. By the 4th day, she was nickering for his attention. Sam smiled at the memory. He'd been with his father that day, watching with a child's impatience as the seemingly endless wait continued. But when the mare finally approached John Mitchell voluntarily, nuzzling his outstretched hand, Sam had understood something important about the difference between forcing a relationship and allowing one to develop naturally. "Wish he was here to advise me," Sam murmured. "He is, in a way," Pete replied. "Everything he taught you is still there, trust it." A small crowd had already gathered across the street, early risers who wanted to witness either Sam's triumph or his likely defeat. Sam recognized most of the faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, all intensely curious about what would happen when the young ranch hand entered the corral with the infamous Thunder. "Looks like you've got an audience," Pete observed. "Can't be." "Helped," Sam said, though he wished for privacy during these crucial first attempts. "Let's get started." Sam approached the corral gate slowly, making no sudden movements. Thunder immediately turned to face him fully, his ears pricked forward in alert attention. The horse took several steps back, maintaining distance, but he didn't rear or strike out as he had with previous challengers. "Easy, boy," Sam said softly, his voice pitched low and calm. "Not here to hurt you, just want to get acquainted." He opened the gate just wide enough to slip through, then closed it carefully behind him. Thunder snorted and tossed his magnificent head, but he didn't bolt to the far corner as Sam had expected. "That's something," Pete murmured from outside. "The fence." Sam stood perfectly still just inside the gate, giving Thunder time to assess this new situation. The horse's nostrils flared as he took in Sam's scent, his body tense and ready to flee or fight if necessary. "You're a fine-looking horse," Sam continued conversationally, pulling the wooden whistle from his pocket. "Bet you've got some stories to tell, if a man knew how to listen." He raised the whistle to his lips and blew a soft, clear note, not sharp or commanding, but gentle and musical. Thunder's ears swiveled forward with interest, and Sam saw something remarkable happen. The tension in the horse's muscles seemed to ease just slightly. "He's responding," Pete called quietly to the growing crowd. "Look at his posture." Sam blew another note, then another, creating a simple melody that seemed to hang in the morning air like a question waiting for an answer. Thunder took a cautious step forward, then stopped, clearly torn between curiosity and fear. "Sarah, you need to see this," Sam heard someone say from the crowd. He glanced toward the fence and saw a young woman approaching, her auburn hair neatly braided and her green dress practical but becoming. Sarah Whitmore taught at the town's one-room schoolhouse and was known for her intelligence and independent spirit. She'd arrived in Copper Ridge 2 years ago from back east, bringing with her books, ideas, and a perspective that sometimes challenged the frontier town's traditional ways of thinking. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Pete, in a voice pitched low enough not to disturb Sam's work. "Sam's trying a different approach," Pete explained. "Music instead of force." Sarah watched with growing fascination as Sam continued his patient concert for an audience of one. Thunder had moved several steps closer, though he still maintained what he clearly considered a safe distance. "I've read about this," Sarah said, quietly. "There are trainers in Europe who use music and gentle persistence instead of braking techniques. They call it horse whispering." "Your pa ever mention anything like that?" Pete asked. "Never," Sarah replied. "But then most people around here think there's only one way to handle a difficult horse." Sam had been in the corral for nearly an hour, alternating between soft melodies and quiet conversation, when Thunder made a decision that surprised everyone watching. The great horse took 3 deliberate steps forward, closing the distance between himself and the young man to less than 20 feet. It was the closest Thunder had voluntarily come to any human being in 3 years. "Well, I'll be," Pete breathed. The crowd had grown larger, word of Sam's progress spreading through the town like news of a miracle. Mayor Whitman arrived just as Thunder took another tentative step forward, his ears pricked with genuine curiosity rather than fear. "What's he doing?" Whitman asked Henry Davies. "Exactly what he said he would," Davies replied, sounding surprised by his own words. "Trying to understand the horse instead of dominate it." Sarah found herself completely absorbed by what she was witnessing. In her 2 years in Copper Ridge, she'd watched men approach animals, and often each other, with the assumption that strength and force were the only reliable tools for getting results. But Sam Mitchell was demonstrating something different, the power of patience, respect, and genuine communication. "He's not treating Thunder like a problem to be solved," she murmured to Pete. "He's treating him like an individual worthy of consideration." "That's exactly what his daddy would have done," Pete agreed. As the morning sun climbed higher, Sam continued his gentle persistence. He moved very slowly around the corral, never directly approaching Thunder, but allowing the horse to observe him from different angles. Occasionally, he would stop and play another soft tune on the wooden whistle, and each time, Thunder's attention would focus completely on the sound. By noon, when Sam finally left the corral for a break, Thunder had closed the distance to within 15 feet, still wary, still ready to flee, but no longer seeing the young man as an immediate threat. "How'd it feel?" Pete asked as Sam latched the gate behind him. "Like a conversation," Sam replied, pulling out his pocket watch to check the time. "He's listening, trying to figure out what I want from him, and I think he's starting to understand that maybe I don't want to hurt him." Sarah approached as the crowd began to disperse, people heading home for their midday meals, with plenty to discuss. "That was remarkable," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Whitmore. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Sam Mitchell," he replied, shaking her hand and noticing how her eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Whitmore. I've read about training methods like yours in some educational journals from back east," she continued, "but I never expected to see them used here." "Just following my father's teachings," Sam said modestly. "Well, your father was clearly ahead of his time," Sarah replied. "What you accomplished this morning, getting Thunder to approach voluntarily, that's more progress than anyone else has made in 3 years." As Sam walked back toward the boarding house for his own meal, he felt a cautious optimism growing in his chest. Thunder was listening, responding, beginning to trust. It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. 2 more days to prove that understanding could triumph over force. 2 more days to save Thunder's life, and maybe, just maybe, change the way an entire town thought about strength and gentleness. Behind him, Thunder stood watching through the corral fence, his magnificent head held high, his dark eyes following. The young man who had spoken to him with music instead of anger, the second morning, brought both progress and revelation. Sam arrived at the corral to find Thunder standing near the fence, not pressed against it in panic, but simply closer than he'd ever positioned himself before. It was as if the horse had spent the night thinking about their previous encounter, and decided that perhaps this particular human might be different. "Morning, Thunder," Sam said softly, and was rewarded when the horse's ears swiveled toward him immediately. Pete appeared with coffee and a knowing smile. "He's been standing there since dawn, watching the path you take from the boarding house. Never seen him show interest in a human's routine before." Sam felt his heart lift at this news. Animals that tracked human patterns were animals that had begun to form connections. It was exactly the kind of sign his father would have looked for. As Sam entered the corral, Thunder remained remarkably calm. The great horse watched with those intelligent dark eyes, but there was less fear in his posture today, less readiness to bolt or strike out. Sam began his routine of soft whistles and gentle conversation, moving slowly around the enclosure while Thunder tracked his movements. "You know," Sam said conversationally, "I've been wondering about your history, where you came from, what happened to make you so wary of people." He was playing a soft melody on his wooden whistle when Sarah appeared at the fence, carrying what looked like a worn leather satchel. "Good morning, Sam," she called quietly. "I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I think I may have found something interesting." "What kind of something?" Sam asked, never taking his eyes off Thunder. Sarah pulled a braided rope from her satchel, not the harsh manila rope typically used for breaking horses, but something finer, made from what looked like horsehair itself. "I was looking through some old territorial records yesterday, trying to learn more about horses like Thunder. I found this tucked inside a file about livestock transfers. She held up the rope, and Thunder's reaction was immediate and startling. The horse's head came up sharply, his nostrils flaring, and he took several quick steps toward the fence. But instead of aggression or fear, there was something else in his eyes, recognition, perhaps even longing. "Well, I'll be damned," Pete muttered. "Look at him." Sam approached the fence slowly. "May I?" he asked Sarah. She handed him the rope, and Sam held it up where Thunder could see it clearly. The horse actually nickered, a soft, questioning sound that none of them had ever heard from him before. "There's writing burned into the leather here," Sarah said, pointing to small marks near one end of the rope. "It's faded, but I think it says Thunder, Little Wolf Band." "Little Wolf," Sam repeated thoughtfully. "That's a Cheyenne name, isn't it?" "I believe so," Sarah confirmed. "And there's more. I found a record of a raid about 4 years ago, maybe 50 miles north of here. A small Cheyenne band was attacked by soldiers, several people killed. The survivors scattered, and their horses were rounded up and sold to various ranches and cattle operations. The pieces began falling into place in Sam's mind. Thunder hadn't been born wild. He'd been someone's beloved companion, trained with patience and care, bonded to a human being who had then been violently taken from him. "That's why you fight so hard," Sam said softly, looking at Thunder with new understanding. "You're not mean. You're grieving." Thunder moved closer to the fence, his attention fixed on the horsehair rope in Sam's hands. When Sam held it out toward him, the horse actually stretched his neck forward to sniff it, his whole body trembling with some deep emotion. "This changes everything," Pete said quietly. "How so?" Sarah asked. "If Thunder was trained with kindness once before, it means he can be again," Sam explained. "He's not fighting against being tamed. He's fighting against being hurt, the way he was hurt when his person was killed." Sam spent the rest of the morning working with Thunder and the rope, not trying to use it as a tool of control, but simply letting the horse reacquaint himself with something that represented gentleness from his past. By noon, Thunder was allowing Sam to come within 10 feet of him, a remarkable improvement that had the growing crowd of observers murmuring with amazement. But not everyone was pleased with Sam's progress. "He's still not rideable," Mayor Whitman observed during the lunch break, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Come Sunday evening, if that horse can't carry a man safely, all this gentle nonsense won't matter." "Give it time, Whitman," Martha said, emerging from her saloon with a tray of sandwiches for Sam and Pete. "Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome didn't have a town council breathing down its neck about railroad investors," Whitman replied sharply. "I got another telegram this morning. The railroad company is sending a representative next week to evaluate our community. They want to see stability, progress, practical decision-making. They don't want to see us wasting resources on sentimental projects." Sam felt the pressure of those words, but Sarah's voice rose in his defense. "What they'll see," she said firmly, "is a community capable of solving problems through innovation rather than just force. That should impress any modern business." Whitman looked skeptical, but he didn't argue further. As the afternoon wore on, more people drifted by to watch Sam's work with Thunder. Some were genuinely supportive, others seemed to be waiting for failure. But all were fascinated by the unprecedented sight of the infamous horse actually seeking out human contact. During a brief break, Sarah approached Sam with a question that had clearly been on her mind. "What made you so certain this would work?" she asked. "Even with your father's teaching, this was an enormous risk." Sam was quiet for a moment, watching Thunder browse peacefully at a pile of hay Pete had thrown into the corral. "My father used to say that every creature deserves to be understood before it's judged," he replied finally. "Thunder spent 3 years being judged, and it didn't help anyone. Seemed like understanding was worth trying. And if it doesn't work, if you can't, get him rideable by Sunday?" The question Sam had been avoiding thinking about directly. "Then I'll have tried something different, and maybe the next person who faces a similar challenge will learn from what I attempted." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. You're braver than you. And think Sam Mitchell. Or more foolish, Sam replied with a rueful smile. Sometimes the two look very similar from the outside, Sarah observed. But from where I'm standing, what you're doing looks like courage. As evening approached, and Sam prepared to end his second day of work with Thunder, he realized that something fundamental had shifted. The horse was no longer viewing him as a threat to be repelled, but as a puzzle to be solved. Thunder would watch Sam's movements with obvious curiosity, would respond to the wooden whistle with alert attention, and would even follow Sam's progress along the fence line as if reluctant to lose sight of him. Tomorrow's the last day, Pete reminded Sam as they watched Thunder settle down for the night. I know, Sam replied, his hand unconsciously finding his father's pocket watch. But look at him, Pete, really look at him. Thunder stood calmly in the center of the corral, no longer pacing restlessly or pressing himself against the far fence. His head was relaxed, his breathing even, his whole posture suggesting peace rather than perpetual readiness for battle. He's remembering what it feels like to trust, Sam continued. Tomorrow we'll find out if he's ready to take the next step. As Sam walked back toward the boarding house, Sarah fell into step beside him, her presence comfortable and encouraging. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said quietly, you've already accomplished something remarkable. You've shown this town that there are different ways to approach difficult problems. Let's hope that's enough, Sam replied, though privately he wondered if understanding and progress would be sufficient to save Thunder's life when the final test came. The third dawn brought an unexpected visitor to Copper Ridge. Sam was preparing for what he knew might be his final day with Thunder when Pete approached with an elderly Native American man walking quietly beside him. The stranger was perhaps 70 years old, his weathered face bearing the lines of someone who had lived through both joy and terrible loss. He wore simple clothes, worn leather pants and a cotton shirt, but carried himself with the dignity of someone accustomed to respect. Around his neck hung a small medicine bag made of soft doeskin. Sam, Pete said quietly, this is Joseph Little. Wolf, he says he has something to tell you about Thunder. Sam felt his pulse quicken. You knew him before he came here? Joseph nodded slowly, his dark eyes studying Thunder through the corral fence. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear, flavored with an accent that spoke of another language. Learned first. He was called Mahpe in our tongue. Thunder is close enough. The old man's voice carried a weight of sadness. He belonged to my grandson, Walking Bear. They grew up together, boy and colt learning from each other. Sam listened with growing understanding as Joseph told Thunder's story. Walking Bear had been 17 when the soldiers came, barely older than Sam was now. He'd been training horses for the band using methods passed down through generations. Patient, gentle techniques that built partnerships instead of dominance. Walking Bear could speak to horses as if they shared the same heart, Joseph continued. Marpe was his greatest success, his closest friend. They moved together like dancer and shadow. What happened to them? Sam asked, though he suspected he already knew. Joseph's face hardened with old pain. Soldiers came in winter, said we were off the reservation. We tried to explain. We were traveling to join my brother's band, had permission from the agent. They did not listen. When the shooting started, Walking Bear tried to protect the horses. A bullet found him as he was freeing Mappy from the picket line. Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach. Thunder saw it happen. Everything. The killing, the burning, the scattering. When we gathered the survivors, Mappy was gone. We heard later he was captured with other horses, sold to white ranchers. Joseph's voice grew softer. For 4 years I wondered what became of my grandson's shadow. The old man reached into his medicine bag and withdrew something that made Thunder's head come up sharply. It was a simple bridle, but unlike anything Sam had seen before. Instead of harsh metal bits and leather straps, it was woven from soft plant fibers and horsehair designed to guide rather than force. Walking Bear made this, Joseph said. Mapi knew its touch, trusted it. Perhaps he remembers. Thunder approached the fence as close as he'd ever come, his nostrils flaring as he caught scent of the familiar materials. He nickered softly, a sound of recognition and longing that made Sam's chest tighten with emotion. "May I?" Sam asked, indicating the bridle. Joseph nodded and passed it through the fence rails. The moment Sam's hands touched the woven strands, he understood why Thunder had fought so desperately against conventional tackle. Every rope, every bit, every harsh command had been a reminder of the violence that had torn him away from everything he'd known and loved. "How should I approach him?" Sam asked quietly. "As Walking Bear would have," Joseph replied. "With respect, with understanding that he carries wounds deeper than flesh." Sam entered the corral with the sacred bridle in his hands, moving with even greater care than usual. Thunder watched his approach with intense focus, clearly recognizing something that stirred powerful memories. "Easy, Mapi," Sam said, using the horse's original name. "I know you remember. I know you're still grieving for Walking Bear." Thunder trembled as Sam drew nearer, but he didn't retreat. When Sam held up the bridle where the horse could see it clearly, Thunder actually took a step forward. "That's it," Sam encouraged softly. "You remember kindness, don't you? You remember what it felt like to be someone's partner instead of someone's property." The breakthrough came suddenly. Thunder closed the remaining distance between them and gently pressed his muzzle against Sam's chest. The first voluntary physical contact he'd made with any human since his capture 4 years ago. Sam felt tears start in his eyes as he slowly raised his hand to touch Thunder's neck. The horse flinched slightly but didn't pull away, allowing the gentle contact that represented so much more than just human and animal coming together. "He remembers," Joseph said quietly from outside the fence. "The heart remembers what the mind tries to forget." Word of Joseph's arrival and the remarkable scene in the corral spread quickly through Copper Ridge. By mid-morning, a larger crowd than usual had gathered, including Mayor Whitman and several council members who looked increasingly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "This is all very touching," Whitman said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "but it doesn't change our situation. We need to know if that horse can be safely ridden, not whether he can remember his past." "Give Sam time," Martha called out from the crowd. "What we're seeing here is more progress than anyone thought possible." "Time is what we don't have," Councilman Davies replied sharply. "The railroad representative arrives tomorrow. We can't afford to look like a community that makes decisions based on sentiment instead of sound business judgment." Sam heard the mounting pressure in their voices, but forced himself to focus on Thunder. The horse was allowing him to stroke his neck, his powerful muscles gradually relaxing under the gentle touch. It was the foundation of trust that everything else would build upon. Joseph approached the fence and spoke to Thunder in Cheyenne, his voice low and musical. Thunder's ears pricked forward, and he nickered in response. An actual conversation in a language he hadn't heard for 4 years. "What are you saying to him?" Sarah asked. She'd been watching from the crowd, her face reflecting the same mixture of hope and concern that Sam felt. "I am telling him that Walking Bear would want him to live," Joseph replied, "that choosing to trust again would honor his friend's memory, not betray it." As the day progressed, Sam made unprecedented advances in his work with Thunder. Using the traditional bridle and the techniques Joseph described, he was able to approach from all angles, to touch Thunder's flanks and back, even to lean gentle weight against the horse's side. But the most significant moment came in the afternoon, when Sam placed both hands on Thunder's back and the horse stood perfectly still, accepting the contact without fear or resistance. "He's ready," Joseph observed quietly. "Tomorrow, if you approach with respect and patience, he will carry you." "Are you certain?" Sam asked, his voice tight with the weight of responsibility. "As certain as an old man can be about the heart of a horse who has suffered much, but remembered." "Love," Joseph replied, As evening fell and the crowd dispersed, Sam remained in the corral with Thunder, simply being present with the magnificent animal who had endured so much loss. The horse stood calmly beside him, occasionally nuzzling Sam's shoulder or breathing softly against his neck. "Tomorrow's the test," Sam murmured, his hand resting on Thunder's powerful shoulder. "But you've already won, haven't you? You've remembered how to trust." Thunder's response was to step closer, resting his great head against Sam's chest in a gesture that spoke more clearly than words ever could. Whatever happened in tomorrow's final trial, something precious had been restored, not just a damaged horse's faith in humans, but a young man's belief in the power of understanding over force. The final day would determine whether Copper Ridge was ready to embrace that lesson. Sam spent most of the night before his final day with Thunder in the stable workshop, his hands busy with leather and metal, while his mind wrestled with the weight of what lay ahead. The morning's trial would determine not just Thunder's fate, but whether an entire town could learn to see strength in gentleness. By lamplight, he carefully shaped a bit unlike any used in Copper Ridge before. Instead of harsh steel edges, he smoothed river stones until they were perfectly round and polished, then wrapped them with soft leather. The result was a bit that could guide without pain, control without cruelty. Joseph Littlewolf sat nearby, sharing stories of his grandson's horse-training methods, while his weathered hands helped weave a new halter from plant fibers and horsehair. The old man's presence brought Sam a sense of connection to something deeper than just one young cowboy's attempt to save a horse. Walking Bear believed that the partnership between horse and rider should feel like dancing, Joseph said as he worked. The human leads, but both moved together in harmony. "I've never danced much," Sam admitted, testing the smoothness of his handmade bit. "Then tomorrow you will learn," Joseph replied, with the hint of a smile. Sarah arrived at the stable just after dawn, carrying a basket of food that smelled like fresh bread and coffee. She'd been coming earlier each day, drawn by what she later described as the most remarkable educational experience she'd ever witnessed. "How are you feeling about today?" she asked, as Sam accepted the warm breakfast gratefully. "Nervous," Sam replied honestly, "but hopeful. Thunder's been through so much. If we can just show the town that there's a better way to handle difficult situations, maybe his suffering will have served a purpose." Pete emerged from the feed room, already dressed, for what everyone knew would be a significant day in Copper Ridge's history. Word had spread beyond the town limits, and Sam could see unfamiliar faces gathering along Main Street. People who'd traveled from neighboring communities to witness either a miracle or a catastrophe. "Lot of folks here today," Pete observed, "including some who'd be happy to see you fail." Sam nodded grimly. He'd heard the whispers, the bets being placed on how long he'd last once he tried to mount Thunder. Some people seemed to view his approach as a personal challenge to their own beliefs about strength and control. When Sam entered the corral with his specially crafted equipment, Thunder approached him immediately, a sight that still amazed the watching crowd. The great horse nuzzled Sam's shoulder in greeting, a gesture of affection that would have been impossible just days ago. "Morning, Mape," Sam said softly, using the Cheyenne name that seemed to resonate with something deep in Thunder's memory. "Ready to show these folks what partnership looks like?" He began with the traditional bridle Joseph had brought, letting Thunder reacquaint himself with its familiar texture and scent. The horse accepted it readily, his trust in Sam now complete enough that he didn't flinch even when the bridle settled over his ears. Next came the blanket, a moment Sam had been building toward for 3 days. He'd seen how Thunder reacted to sudden movements, to the feeling of being trapped or restrained. This had to be done with perfect patience. Sam held the blanket where Thunder could see and smell it, letting the horse investigate it thoroughly before making any move to place it on his back. Thunder snorted softly and pawed the ground, but he didn't retreat. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured. "Just a blanket, not a trap, not a cage, just something to make the saddle more comfortable." He draped the blanket over his own arm first, showing Thunder. How soft and harmless it was. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, he laid it across Thunder's withers. Thunder tensed immediately, his muscles bunching as if preparing to explode into action. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of bucking or bolting, he turned his head to look at Sam, as if seeking reassurance. "That's it," Sam encouraged, his voice steady and calm. "You're doing fine. This is how Walking Bear would have done it, isn't it? With patience and respect." Gradually, Thunder's muscles relaxed. He stood perfectly still as Sam smoothed the blanket across his back, accepting this new sensation because he trusted the person introducing it. The crowd watching from outside the corral fell silent. Many of them had never seen Thunder allow anyone to approach his hindquarters, let alone place anything on his back. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered Bill Henderson, Thunder's legal owner. "Maybe there is something to this gentle approach after all." But not everyone was convinced. Mayor Whitman pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with frustration and what looked like genuine anger. "This is exactly the kind of sentimental nonsense we can't afford," he announced loudly. "The railroad representative will be here in 2 hours, and he's going to see our town wasting time on an elaborate circus act instead of making practical decisions." "What he's going to see," Martha shot back from across the street, "is a community that solves problems with intelligence instead of just brute force." "Intelligence?" Whitman scoffed. "That horse put Jake Morrison in the doctor's office with broken bones. Intelligence would be putting the animal down before someone gets killed." Sarah stepped forward, her school teacher's authority evident in her voice. "Mr. Mayor, what Sam has accomplished in 3 days is extraordinary by any measure. Thunder has gone from being completely unapproachable to accepting human contact, equipment, and training. That represents genuine progress." "Progress toward what?" Whitman demanded. "The horse still hasn't been ridden. For all we know, the moment Sam tries to mount him, Thunder will revert to his old behavior." "Then let's find out," Sam called from inside the corral, his voice carrying clearly across the growing crowd. An expectant hush fell over the assembled townspeople. This was the moment they'd all been waiting for, the test that would determine whether Sam's revolutionary approach had truly worked or whether Thunder remained the dangerous, untamable beast they'd always believed him to be. Sam approached Thunder's side with the careful saddle he'd modified specifically for this horse. Instead of the heavy, restrictive equipment typically used for breaking horses, this saddle was lighter, fitted with extra padding, designed for comfort rather than control. Thunder watched with interest as Sam showed him the saddle, let him sniff, and investigate it. The horse's calm acceptance of this new piece of equipment drew murmurs of amazement from the watching crowd. "I've been researching Thunder's history," Sarah announced to the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done her homework. "He wasn't born wild. He was trained from birth by a Cheyenne youth named Walking Bear. Thunder was never meant to be a workhorse driven by force. He was raised to be a companion, a partner." This revelation sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. Many people had assumed Thunder was simply a wild horse that had never been properly broken. The idea that he'd once been someone's beloved companion, trained with gentleness and respect, cast his subsequent behavior in an entirely different light. "That explains a lot," Pete observed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "No wonder he fought so hard against being treated like a piece of equipment. He remembered being treated like family." Sam positioned the saddle on Thunder's back, moving with the same deliberate care he'd used for everything else. Thunder shifted his weight slightly, but made no move to dislodge the unfamiliar burden. As Sam tightened the cinch, slowly, carefully, giving Thunder time to adjust to each new sensation, the crowd held its collective breath. This was farther than anyone had ever gotten with the legendary horse. Thunder stood perfectly still, his dark eyes focused on Sam with complete trust. Whatever fears and trauma had driven his behavior for the past 3 years, they seemed to have been replaced by something much more powerful, the memory of what it felt like to be understood, respected, and loved. The revelation came from an unexpected source, just as Sam was preparing for the moment everyone had been waiting for. A weathered man in his 60s pushed through the crowd, his face bearing the deep lines of someone who'd spent decades under the frontier sun. His name was Tom Bradley, and he'd been one of Copper Ridge's earliest settlers. "Hold on there, son," Bradley called out, his voice carrying the authority of age and experience. "Before you climb on that horse, there's something folks need to know." Sam paused, his hand resting on Thunder's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of the horse's breathing. "What is it, Mr. Bradley?" Bradley approached the corral fence, his weathered hands gripping the rails as he studied Thunder with growing recognition. "I've been watching from back there, trying to remember where I'd seen that horse before. Took me 3 days, but it finally came to me." The crowd grew quiet, sensing that whatever Bradley was about to reveal would be significant. "That there horse," Bradley continued, his voice growing stronger with certainty. "That's not just any Cheyenne pony, that's Midnight." The name hit the gathered townspeople like a physical blow. Several people gasped audibly, and Sarah reached out to grip Martha's arm for support. "Midnight?" Mayor Whitman repeated, his voice hollow with disbelief. "That's impossible. Midnight died with Colonel Morrison 7 years ago." "No, sir," Bradley replied firmly. "Midnight survived. I saw him running with a small band of Cheyenne horses about a year after the raid, always wondered what became of him." Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach as the implications of Bradley's words became clear. Colonel James Morrison. No. Relation to the horsebreaker Jake Morrison, had been Copper Ridge's founder and most prominent citizen. He'd established the town's first businesses, organized its defense against raids, and served as both mayor and sheriff until his death. More importantly, Midnight had been Colonel Morrison's most prized possession, a magnificent black horse the colonel had raised from a colt, trained personally, and rode on every significant occasion in the town's early history. Joseph Little Wolf stepped forward, from where he'd been standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. His weathered face was grave as he looked at Thunder with new understanding. "Mape was not with Walking Bear when the soldiers came," he said slowly, his accented English carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "He came to us later, during the winter running with wild horses. We thought he was a gift from the spirits, such a fine animal, trained but without a rider." "The raid where Colonel Morrison died," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was the same raid where Walking Bear was killed, wasn't it?" Joseph nodded sadly. "2 good men, 2 peoples at war, both dying on the same day, both leaving behind a horse who had loved them." The crowd was completely silent now, absorbing the stunning revelation that had reframed everything they thought they knew. Thunder, Midnight, hadn't been some wild, unbreakable horse. He'd been their founder's beloved companion, traumatized by witnessing his master's death, then traumatized again when his second human friend was also killed in the violence between 2 cultures. "My God," Martha breathed. "He's been grieving for 7 years, first the colonel, then Walking Bear." Sam felt Thunder, Midnight, shift slightly beneath his hand, as if the horse could sense the change in the crowd's energy. The great black head turned toward the gathered people, those intelligent dark eyes seeming to study faces he might have recognized from long ago. "That's why he fought so hard," Pete said quietly. "He wasn't being mean or stubborn. He was protecting himself from losing another person he cared about." Mayor Whitman looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. "If that's really Midnight, then we've been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "You've been trying to break the spirit of the horse that carried your town's founder," Sarah completed gently. "The same horse that probably saved dozens of lives. During Indian raids, carried the colonel through every important moment in Copper Ridge's early history." The weight of this revelation settled over the crowd like a physical presence. Many of these people remembered Colonel Morrison, remembered seeing him ride through town on his magnificent black horse. They'd witnessed the partnership between man and animal, the obvious affection and respect that had existed between them, and for 3 years they'd been advocating for the destruction of that same noble animal, calling him dangerous and worthless, never understanding that his difficult behavior stemmed from a grief too profound for most humans to comprehend. "I remember when the colonel got him," said an elderly woman named Agnes Fletcher. "Just a colt then, barely weaned. The colonel spent hours every day with that little horse, teaching him to respond to voice commands, to come when called, to stand ground during gunfire." "Smartest horse I ever saw," added another old-timer. "During the big raid in '82, Midnight carried the colonel through 3 separate attacks, never once spooked or bolted. Saved lives that day. Bill Henderson, Thunder's legal owner, looked stricken. "I've been trying to sell the colonel's horse," he said, his voice thick with shame. "The horse that helped build this town. And I was ready to have him shot because he wouldn't submit to being treated like common livestock." Sam continued to stroke Thunder's neck, feeling the horse's steady presence beside him. Everything made sense now, the intelligence in those dark eyes, the careful way Thunder evaluated each situation, the obvious breeding and training that showed in his movements even when he was fighting. "He's not wild," Sam said quietly, his words carrying to the entire crowd. "He's not broken. He's just been waiting for someone to treat him the way the colonel did, the way Walking Bear did, with respect, with partnership instead of domination." Joseph Littlewolf approached the fence, speaking to Thunder in Cheyenne. The horse's ears pricked forward immediately, and he nickered in response. The same kind of conversation Sam had witnessed before. "What are you telling him?" Sarah asked. "I'm telling him about the colonel," Joseph replied. "How both his masters were good men caught in bad circumstances. How neither would want him to give up on trusting humans." Thunder turned to look directly at Joseph, then back at Sam, then out at the crowd of people who had been ready to end his life just days ago. "If horses could think in human terms," Sam reflected, "Thunder might be wondering whether these people deserved his trust. The question now," Mayor Whitman said, his voice subdued, "is what do we do with this information?" "We honor it," Martha replied firmly. "We honor the colonel's memory by treating his horse the way the colonel would have wanted. And we honor Walking Bear's memory," Joseph added, "by showing that not all white men have forgotten how to see the heart of a horse." Sam felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about taming a difficult horse anymore. It was about healing a wound that had been festering in the heart of the community for 7 years, about making amends for nearly destroying something precious out of ignorance and fear. "Are you still planning to ride him?" someone called from the crowd. Sam looked at Thunder Midnight, feeling the profound trust the horse had placed in him over the past 3 days. The great black head turned toward him, those intelligent eyes reflecting a question that went beyond. "Mere training, not ride him," Sam corrected gently. "Partner with him, the way the colonel did, the way Walking Bear did, the way it was always meant to be." He placed his foot in the stirrup, feeling Thunder's muscles tense slightly but without fear or aggression. This was the moment that would determine not just Thunder's future, but perhaps the future understanding between the horse and the community that had once celebrated him. As Sam slowly, respectfully, swung into the saddle, Thunder stood perfectly, still, not broken into submission, but choosing to accept this partnership because he had learned once again to trust. The crowd held its breath as boy and horse stood together, both of them ready to write a new chapter in Copper Ridge's history, the discovery of Thunder's true identity as Colonel Morrison's beloved Midnight had changed everything. But Sam knew that knowledge alone wouldn't be enough. As he sat in the saddle for the first time, feeling the powerful horse beneath him, he understood that both Thunder and the town needed something more than just a successful ride. They needed healing. Thunder stood perfectly still, his muscles tense but controlled, as if he were making a conscious decision to trust this young man who had approached him with patience instead of force. Sam could feel the horse's uncertainty, the internal battle between old trauma and new hope. "Easy, boy," Sam murmured, his hands light on the reins. "We're just going to take this slow." The crowd watched in amazement as Sam guided Thunder through a few careful steps around the corral. The horse responded beautifully to gentle pressure and voice commands, moving with the fluid grace that had once made him famous throughout the territory. But Sam could sense something incomplete in their connection. Thunder was cooperating, even trusting. But there was still a deep sadness in the horse's movements, a weight of grief that hadn't been fully addressed. As Sam dismounted after the brief ride, Joseph Little Wolf approached with an expression of thoughtful concern. "He accepts you," the elderly Cheyenne man observed, "but his heart still carries old wounds. In my people's way, we would hold a ceremony to honor the dead and help the living move forward." "What kind of ceremony?" Sam asked, intrigued by the idea. "Something to acknowledge his losses, to show respect for both Colonel Morrison and Walking Bear. Thunder has been carrying their memory alone for too long. Perhaps it is time for the community to share that burden." Mayor Whitman overheard the conversation and looked skeptical. "I'm not sure this is the time for—" "It's exactly the time," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward with the determined expression that had made her such an effective teacher. "We've just learned that we've been mistreating a horse that helped build this town. Don't we owe him and the Colonel's memory some kind of acknowledgement?" Martha nodded emphatically. "Sarah's right. We should do something to honor both the Colonel and that Cheyenne boy who cared for Midnight. Show some respect for what we nearly lost through ignorance." Word of the proposed ceremony spread quickly through Copper Ridge, and by evening the entire town seemed to be involved in planning something unprecedented. Agnes Fletcher brought flowers from her garden, the same kind she'd planted around Colonel Morrison's grave. Tom Bradley contributed a small American flag that had flown over the Colonel's office. Even skeptical townspeople found themselves drawn into the preparation. Joseph Little Wolf worked with Sarah and Martha to design a ceremony that would honor both cultures that had loved Thunder. They planned to hold it at sunset in the corral where so much drama had already unfolded, with the entire community present to witness Thunder's emotional healing. Sam spent the evening preparing himself mentally for what would be more than just a public demonstration of horse training. He knew that tomorrow's ceremony would represent a test of everything he believed about compassion, understanding, and the possibility of healing old wounds through respect rather than force. He sat on the front steps of the boarding house, his father's pocket watch in his hands, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. Just 4 days ago, he'd been a quiet ranch hand with an uncertain future. Now he found himself at the center of his town's most significant moment of reconciliation in years. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Sarah's voice came from the evening shadows as she approached. "Terrified," Sam admitted honestly. "Not about riding Thunder. I think we understand each other now. But about everything else. The ceremony, the town watching, the weight of all that history and expectation." Sarah sat beside him on the steps, her presence comforting and steady. "You know, when I first came to Copper Ridge, I thought it was just another frontier town. Rough, practical, maybe a little backward in its thinking. But what I've seen these past few days has changed my mind completely." "How so?" "You've shown this community that there are different ways to approach problems, that strength doesn't always mean force, that understanding can be more powerful than dominance. That's not backward thinking, that's actually quite progressive." Sam looked out toward the stable where Thunder was spending his last night as an outcast. Tomorrow, if everything went as planned, the horse would begin a new chapter as a respected member of the community that had once condemned him. "I keep thinking about my father," Sam said quietly. "He always believed that every creature deserves to be understood before it's judged. But I wonder what he'd think about turning that into a public spectacle." "I think," Sarah replied thoughtfully, "that he'd be proud of you for standing up for what you believe in, even when it was difficult." And I think he'd understand that sometimes healing needs to be witnessed to be complete. The next morning dawned, clear and bright, perfect weather for what the whole town was calling simply the ceremony. People began gathering early, not just from Copper Ridge, but from neighboring communities as well. Word had spread about the remarkable transformation of the infamous Thunder, and folks wanted to witness what might be a historic moment. Sam spent the morning in quiet preparation, checking his equipment one final time, speaking softly with Thunder, centering himself for what lay ahead. The horse seemed to sense that something significant was approaching. His movements were alert but calm, his dark eyes reflecting intelligence and anticipation. Joseph Little Wolf arrived mid-morning with several items that would be important to the ceremony. Sage for smudging, eagle feathers that had belonged to Walking Bear, and a small pouch of earth from the place where both Colonel Morrison and Walking Bear had died. "Today we help Thunder let go of old grief," Joseph explained as he arranged the ceremonial items carefully. "We show him that remembering the dead doesn't mean forgetting how to live." By afternoon, nearly 200 people had gathered around the corral, creating an atmosphere that felt part celebration, part memorial service, part community reconciliation. Mayor Whitman had initially worried about the spectacle, but even he seemed caught up in the significance of the moment. Sarah had worked with the school children to prepare readings about both Colonel Morrison's contributions to the town and the tragedy of the conflicts that had claimed Walking Bear's life. Martha had organized the women of the town to provide food and drink, turning the event into a community gathering that honored everyone involved. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Joseph Little Wolf began the ceremony, with words spoken in both Cheyenne and English, acknowledging the losses that Thunder had endured and the grief he had carried for so long. Thunder stood quietly in the center of the corral, his attention focused on Joseph's voice as if he recognized the cadences of his second master's language. When Joseph burned sage and wafted the cleansing smoke toward the horse, Thunder actually stepped forward, breathing deeply of the familiar scent. "We gather," Joseph said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, "to honor two good men who died too young, and to help their horse find peace with their memory." Agnes Fletcher read a tribute to Colonel Morrison, recalling his vision for Copper Ridge and his partnership with the magnificent black horse that had carried him through the town's founding years. Her words painted a picture of a man who had seen potential in both the land and the animals he worked with, who had built something lasting through patience and respect. Then Sarah read a letter she had composed about Walking Bear, based on Joseph's. Stories of the young Cheyenne horse trainer who had approached animals with gentleness and understanding. Though the two cultures had been at war, both men had shared a common love for horses and a belief in partnership over domination. As the ceremony progressed, Thunder's demeanor began to change subtly. The alertness remained, but the underlying tension that had marked his behavior for so long seemed to ease. He moved closer to the fence where Joseph stood, nickering softly at the sound of Cheyenne words he hadn't heard for years. The most powerful moment came when Joseph presented the eagle feathers that had belonged to Walking Bear, holding them where Thunder could see and scent them. The horse trembled with recognition, then pressed his great head against the fence, breathing deeply of the familiar smell. "He remembers," Joseph said quietly. "He remembers love, and he's ready to love again." Sam felt his heart racing as the ceremonial elements concluded, and the moment approached when he would need to demonstrate the partnership he'd built with Thunder over the past 4 days. The entire community was watching, waiting to see if understanding and respect could truly triumph over fear and force. As he approached Thunder with the specially crafted bridle and saddle, Sam felt the weight of history on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one young man and one traumatized horse. It was about proving that healing was possible, that communities could change, that the past didn't have to determine the future. Thunder stood perfectly still as Sam prepared him for riding, his dark eyes reflecting not fear or resistance, but something that looked remarkably like hope. The moment had arrived, and Sam could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes focused on the corral where he stood beside Thunder. The great black horse wore the gentle bridle Joseph Little Wolf had brought, the specially crafted saddle Sam had made for his comfort, and an air of calm anticipation that would have been impossible just days earlier. "Easy, Midnight," Sam said softly, using the horse's original name for the first time in front of the gathered crowd. "Time to show these folks what partnership really looks like." Thunder turned his magnificent head toward Sam, those intelligent, dark eyes reflecting something that might have been understanding. The horse had participated willingly in the ceremony, had accepted the ritual acknowledgement of his lost masters, and now seemed ready to take the next step in his journey from grief to healing. Sam placed his foot in the stirrup, moving with the same deliberate care he'd used throughout their time together. Thunder's muscles tensed slightly, not with fear or aggression, but with the natural response of any horse accepting a rider's weight. "That's it, boy," Sam encouraged, his voice steady and calm. "Just like the Colonel taught you, just like walking. Bear showed you. We're partners in this." The crowd held its collective breath as Sam slowly swung his leg over Thunder's back and settled into the saddle. For a moment that felt like an eternity, horse and rider stood perfectly still, both adjusting to this new reality. Then Thunder took his first step. It wasn't the explosive buck or panicked bolt that everyone had expected based on Thunder's reputation. Instead, it was a careful, measured step forward. The movement of a horse who was choosing to accept his rider rather than being forced into submission. "My God," someone whispered from the crowd. "He's actually doing it." Sam felt Thunder's powerful muscles moving beneath him, felt the rhythm of movement that spoke of strength controlled rather than broken. This wasn't a defeated horse carrying a burden. This was a willing partnership between two beings who had learned to trust each other. "How does it feel, son?" Pete called from the fence line, his weathered face beaming with pride. "Like coming home," Sam replied, and he meant it. Sitting atop Thunder felt natural, right? As if all the events of the past 4 days had been leading to this moment of perfect harmony. Thunder moved into a slow walk around the perimeter of the corral, his gait smooth and controlled. With each step, Sam could feel the horse's confidence growing, could sense the gradual release of tension that had defined Thunder's existence for so long. "Look at his ears," Sarah observed excitedly. "They're forward, alert. He's not afraid. He's curious about what comes next." Indeed, Thunder seemed to be rediscovering the joy of movement, of carrying a human partner who rode with respect rather than domination. His steps became more animated, his head carriage more proud, as if he were remembering what it felt like to be celebrated rather than feared. Sam guided Thunder through a series of simple maneuvers, turns, stops, backing up, all executed with the precision that spoke of Thunder's excellent training. The crowd murmured with appreciation as they witnessed skills that had been hidden beneath years of trauma and mistrust. "He remembers everything," Tom Bradley said in amazement. "Every lesson the Colonel ever taught him, still there, waiting to be rediscovered." As Thunder grew more comfortable with the situation, Sam asked for a trot. The horse's response was immediate and smooth, his powerful stride eating up the ground with fluid efficiency. This was the horse that had once been famous throughout the territory, the magnificent animal that had carried Colonel Morrison through countless adventures and challenges. The transformation was so complete, so dramatic, that some people in the crowd began to weep openly. They were witnessing more than just a successful horse training demonstration. They were seeing healing made manifest, the triumph of understanding over fear, patience over force. Mayor Whitman stood at the fence with tears streaming down his face, finally understanding what the community had almost lost through ignorance and haste. "That's our founder's horse," he said to anyone who would listen. "That's the animal that helped build this town, and we nearly destroyed him." Joseph Little Wolf watched the scene with quiet satisfaction, seeing in Thunder's renewed spirit a validation of his grandson's gentle training methods. "Walking Bear would be proud," he said to Martha, who stood beside him with her own eyes bright with emotion. As the ride continued, Thunder began to show off, demonstrating gaits and movements that revealed the depth of his training and intelligence. He was no longer the sullen, dangerous animal that had terrorized Copper Ridge for 3 years. He was Midnight again, Colonel Morrison's trusted partner, Walking Bear's beloved companion, a horse worthy of admiration and respect. When Sam finally brought Thunder to a halt in the center of the corral, the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains. Horse and rider stood together in the afternoon sunlight, both of them transformed by an experience that had proven the power of patience, understanding, and respect. Thunder arched his powerful neck and nickered softly, as if acknowledging the celebration around him. After years of being seen as a problem to be solved or a danger to be eliminated, he was finally being recognized for what he had always been, a magnificent animal deserving of partnership rather than domination. The moment that would be talked about for generations in Copper Ridge came when Sam looked out at the celebrating crowd and made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "What do you say, Midnight?" he said quietly to Thunder. "Ready to take a ride through town, show everyone what partnership really looks like?" Thunder's response was to arch his neck proudly and prance slightly in place, as if he understood exactly what was being proposed and approved wholeheartedly. Sam guided Thunder toward the corral gate, which Pete quickly opened wide. The crowd parted like water, creating a clear path down Main Street. Children who had been warned to stay far away from the killer horse now pressed forward eagerly, their fear replaced by wonder and excitement. Thunder stepped through the gate and onto Main Street with the bearing of royalty returning to reclaim a kingdom. His hooves rang against the packed earth with a rhythm that seemed to announce his transformation to the entire world. This was no longer the cowering, aggressive animal that had been hidden away behind the stable. This was Midnight, Colonel Morrison's legendary partner, restored to his rightful place in the community. As they rode slowly down the street, people emerged from shops and houses, drawn by the commotion and the sight they could hardly believe. Thunder moved with fluid grace, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his gleaming black coat, his head held high with renewed pride and confidence. "Is that really the same horse?" called out Mrs. Henderson from her front porch, her voice filled with amazement. "That's our Midnight," Tom Bradley replied, his voice choked with emotion. "That's the horse that helped Colonel Morrison build this town." Children began following alongside the procession, their laughter and excitement adding to the celebratory atmosphere. Thunder's ears swiveled constantly, taking in all the sounds and sights, but instead of the hypervigilant wariness he'd shown for years, his attention seemed curious and engaged. When little Emma Davies, the storekeeper's 6-year-old daughter, broke away from her mother and ran directly toward Thunder, several adults gasped in alarm, but Thunder simply stopped and lowered his great head to investigate this small human, his nostrils flaring gently as he took in her scent. "He's so big," Emma whispered in awe, reaching out tentatively to touch Thunder's velvety nose. Thunder stood perfectly still, allowing the child's small hand to stroke his face with the patience of a horse who remembered what it felt like to be trusted by the innocent. The sight of the massive animal gentling himself for a little girl brought tears to more than one observer's eyes. "Can I pet him too?" asked another child, and soon Thunder found himself surrounded by a small crowd of young admirers, all eager to meet the famous horse they'd been taught to fear. Sam watched in amazement as Thunder interacted with each child with careful attention, seeming to understand instinctively that these small humans required extra gentleness. The horse, who had been considered too dangerous for experienced adults to handle, was now allowing children to pet his neck and shoulders, nickering softly when they spoke to him. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, standing close enough to touch Sam's leg as he sat in the saddle. 3 days ago, no one could approach him. Now he's acting like the town's gentle giant. Martha pushed through the crowd with a basket of apples, her face glowing with joy. "These are for Midnight," she announced. "Consider it a welcome home present." Thunder accepted the apples with obvious pleasure, his gentle lips taking them from outstretched hands without any hint of the aggression that had once defined his interactions with humans. Each successful exchange seemed to reinforce his growing confidence and trust. Mayor Whitman approached slowly, his expression a mixture of awe and shame. "Sam, I owe you an apology, and I owe this horse, Midnight, an even bigger one. We almost destroyed something precious because we were too stubborn to look beyond our own preconceptions." "He's not destroyed, Mr. Mayor," Sam replied gently. "He was just waiting for someone to remember what he really was, Colonel Morrison's partner, not just another piece of livestock." The procession continued down Main Street, growing larger as more people joined the celebration. Storefronts that had been shuttered opened wide, their owners emerging to witness what many were already calling a miracle. The blacksmith left his forge, the banker closed his office early, and even the doctor came out from his rounds to see Thunder's triumphant return to public life. At the far end of Main Street stood a small monument to Colonel Morrison, erected shortly after his death, to commemorate his contributions to the town's founding. Without any guidance from Sam, Thunder walked directly to the monument and stopped, lowering his head as if paying respects to his old master's memory. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Joseph Little Wolf stepped forward and spoke quietly, in Cheyenne, his words carrying the cadence of prayer or blessing. Thunder lifted his head and nickered softly, as if responding to a conversation that transcended the barriers between human and animal, between past and present. "He understands," Joseph said quietly to the assembled crowd. "He knows this is where his healing journey ends and his new life begins." As the sun began to set behind the western mountains, casting long golden shadows across Main Street, Sam realized that what had begun as a desperate attempt to save one horse's life had become something much larger. The entire community had witnessed a transformation, not just of Thunder, but of their own understanding of what strength really meant. The bond between Sam and Thunder had become legendary in a single afternoon, but more importantly, it had shown an entire town that patience, respect, and understanding could accomplish what force and domination never could. 1 year later, Copper Ridge had become a different kind of town entirely. The railroad had come through as promised, bringing prosperity and growth, but more importantly, it had brought visitors who came specifically to see the legendary partnership between Sam Mitchell and the horse called Midnight. Sam stood in the expanded stable that now served as the Mitchell Training Center, watching as his latest student, a nervous mare named Duchess, accepted a saddle for the first time without fear or resistance. The gentle methods he'd learned from his father and refined through his experience with Thunder had proven remarkably effective with horses that others had written off as hopeless. "She's responding beautifully," Sarah observed from the fence. Line, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. They'd been married 6 months ago, in a ceremony where Thunder had served as an honorary guest, standing quietly behind the altar as if blessing their union with his presence. "Pa's methods work on any horse, as long as you take time to understand what they're really afraid of," Sam replied, his voice carrying the quiet confidence that had made him the most sought-after horse trainer in 3 territories. Thunder nickered from his spacious stall, where he lived in comfort befitting his status as Copper Ridge's most famous resident. Children came daily to visit him, bringing apples and carrots and receiving gentle nuzzles in return. He'd become the town's unofficial ambassador, proof that even the most troubled soul could find peace through understanding and patience. Mayor Whitman approached, carrying a letter that bore the territorial government's official seal. His expression was one of barely contained excitement. "Sam, Sarah, you need to see this," he announced. "It's from the Territorial Board of Education. They want to establish a formal program here in Copper Ridge, teaching your training methods to horse handlers throughout the region. Sam accepted the letter with surprise, scanning its contents with growing amazement. The officials had heard about his work with Thunder and wanted to create an official school that would teach the Mitchell method to students from across the frontier. They're offering to fund construction of proper facilities, Whitman continued, and they want Sarah to head up the academic portion of the program, documenting the methods and creating a curriculum that can be taught elsewhere. Sarah's eyes sparkled with excitement. We could actually formalize what you do, create a system that other communities could use. Think of all the horses that could be helped, all the people who could learn a better way. The idea was both thrilling and daunting. Sam had never imagined that his simple desire to understand one troubled horse could grow into something with such far-reaching implications. "What do you think, Midnight?" Sam asked, turning to Thunder's stall, ready to be the star of a training. "School?" Thunder stretched his magnificent head over the stall door and nuzzled Sam's shoulder affectionately, as if giving his approval to the ambitious plan. Martha arrived with her usual basket of food, but today she also carried news that would complete the circle of transformation that had begun a year ago. "Joseph Littlewolf asked me to tell you something," she said to Sam. "The Cheyenne Band has established a winter camp about 20 miles south, and they want to invite you and Thunder to visit. Joseph says there are young people there who should learn Walking Bear's training methods, and he thinks it would honor his grandson's memory if you taught them." The prospect of connecting the two cultures that had shaped Thunder's life felt like the natural culmination of everything they'd accomplished. Sam looked at Sarah, seeing in her eyes the same sense of rightness that he felt. "When would we go?" he asked. "Joseph suggests next month before the snow gets too deep," Martha replied. "Says it would be good for Thunder to hear Cheyenne voices again, and good for the young people to see how their traditional methods can bridge the gap between cultures." As the weeks passed, the visit to Joseph's band proved to be everything they'd hoped for, and more. Thunder's reunion with the Cheyenne was deeply moving, the great horse seeming to rediscover parts of himself that had been dormant since Walking Bear's death. The young Cheyenne horseman learned eagerly from Sam, while he absorbed wisdom from their traditional approaches that enriched his own methods. The training school opened the following spring, with students coming from as far away as California and Texas to learn what newspapers had begun calling the Thunder method. Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and by summer she was teaching classroom sessions while managing the school's growing reputation with characteristic efficiency and intelligence. On a warm evening in late summer, as Sam and Sarah sat on the porch of their new house watching Thunder graze peacefully in the pasture, they reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stepped forward that day?" Sarah asked, her hand resting on her belly where their first child grew. "Every day," Sam replied honestly, "but I think about what my father used to say, that every creature deserves to be understood before it's judged. Thunder just needed someone to see past his fear to the heart underneath." Their son was born in October, a healthy boy they named John after Sam's father. Thunder showed remarkable gentleness with the baby, seeming to understand instinctively that this small human would grow up knowing horses as partners rather than conquests. As the first snows began to fall on Copper Ridge, Sam often found himself standing in the pasture with Thunder, both of them looking out at the mountains that had witnessed their transformation. The horse, who had once been called untamable, now served as living proof that patience and understanding could overcome even the deepest trauma. Every man needs something to believe in, something that reminds him good still exists. For the people of Copper Ridge, that reminder came in the form of a young cowboy who chose understanding over force, and a magnificent horse who chose to trust again despite every reason to remain afraid. Their story had become legend, but more importantly, it had become a a lasting reminder that the greatest victories come not from breaking others, but from helping them remember how to be whole.